Hello, hello, everybody. Hello, chat. Let's see who's online right now. Dear Lord. Alright, let's wait for more viewers before we actually start. I mean, it's showing like 0 right now, so, you know. If you're here and you're a student, say hi. Say hi on the chat. Hi. You know. Is anybody on? If you're on, say hi. Maybe you could talk about your feelings a bit. How are you feeling today? No? Well, let's give it a couple minutes and we'll start. Alright, let's begin. Alright. Welcome again to the Intro to Firebase workshop, session 2. Today we'll be covering, well, authentication and cloud functions. So let's, take it kind of back. Like, what is Firebase? Basically, to me, Firebase is, backend for people who are too lazy to do backend. That's why it's called like a platform as a service. So on Firebase, you can do things like handle authentication, or run cloud functions, which is what we'll be doing this week. And then all the things that we've done in previous weeks, like Cloud Firestore basically, and then securing particular routes in Cloud Firestore. So, let's begin. Gonna quickly pull up the notes here. We'll just start with authentication, right? So when we have a web app, typically we don't want everybody to be able to access everything, right? So maybe sometimes you could have, you only want authenticated users to be able to see the particular data, right? So let's take an example of the app we're going to build today. So today, at the end of the session, we will slowly work our way up. Hey, it is 1080. Right. We'll slowly work our way up. So just to quickly show you what we'll be building at the end of the day. You can go on to the you could go on to the GitHub link and then look at the completed app. So we'll have a to-do app where we can log in. And then we have populated default to-do items. Then we have to-do there. And then when we sign out, when we sign in again, I honestly forgot like the well, I forgot email. Let me check real quick. Let's see. Dear Lord. User somebody at something, right? The hell? Someone at something. My God. And look, it persists. It's still there. So this is what we be building up to the end of the day. So let's start off with, as all projects start off, by cloning the Git repo. So just get the link, git clone, alright, here we go. And then let's set up our Firebase project. Rather, let's set up a new Firebase project. We just quickly sign in. Alright. Now the main page. Go to the console. And set up our project. So yeah. So what we'll be covering today using authentication is how to set up authentication with, let users authenticate with their email and password, so they can sign up with their email and password and sign in with their email and password. So Firebase auth is not limited to that. You could also let users sign in using their Google accounts or other social media accounts. So it's pretty, full featured that way. So let's quickly set up the authentication. Right. So I start off by going to the console, clicking authentication, and under the sign in method tab, let's just switch it to enable. Ta-da! First thing done. So let's figure out how we can use these authentication functionality. So let's just quickly create a quick HTML page. Right, and then let's have a look at the Firebase auth docs. Let's see. So yeah, so as usual, we need to start off with our web app by, including the Firebase object within our, our browser window context basically. So as we've done in previous weeks, let's just add a script tag here. We'll have a look at our apps. Add an app. Edit that app. Register our app. And then get our credentials set up. So here we have our config, and then here the app is initialized. So next we need to add the authentication library. So it should look something like this. So instead of Firebase Firestore.js, we'll just use Firebase off.js. Right. So what this does, so if you open this file, let me just desktop, just open this file. There's nothing here, but you see in the background, the JavaScript has loaded the Firebase object, so you can see that there's Firebase object, and then we can also initialize the off object by calling firebase.off. Yep. So now we have an off object, but how do we, visually create the sign-in fields for the user to use, right? So in this case, you don't really need to create, build the HTML or create a form for the users to enter their credentials and then send it to the backend, right? So Firebase UI can handle that for you. So you could just create a div, add a div here. Just create a div and call it Firebase UI off container. Right. And then let's see. So we can check the Firebase docs for how we should do this. So first we need to add Firebase authentication to your web application, which is what we've already done. We've already configured our Firebase app on our page as well. And now we'll just have to add Firebase UI and the relevant CSS files. Right. So following this, all we need to do is follow instructions here, and then call UI start Firebase off container, and that's basically it. Well, you need to note what's important is that you need to have an element in the body for Firebase to basically mount the DOM, to mount the contents of all the login fields onto. So in this case, we'll call it Firebase off container, or we can just call it and that'll still work. So let's refresh. Firebase off is not a function. So yes, in our script we also need to initialize face off. Now let's see. So what happened here? Right. What happened here? What went wrong? So I caught type error, Firebase off is not a function. So normally Firebase off should be made available to you if you load Firebase from the CDN using this script tag and adding this source. But see, the magic word here is defer, right? So what defer does is the defer keyword is basically it waits for the entire page to load and then it executes the script. So what happened here is that some function was trying to call Firebase off, and then it's not there. It's not there because it's not been loaded yet. So we could basically fix this by removing the defer tag here. And then, whoa, now we have a sign in with email. So So now we can do things like choose password. Yeah. But basically, we can see so now this item there exists an object in auth current user. So if I were to sign out, Firebase auth also exposes a method called auth.signout. And now auth current user is null. So maybe let's try signing in again. Over here you can see, well, this is mostly incomprehensible, but you can see that I have access now on the front end to my display name and to my email, which is very useful information that you can use in your app. Right, so what next? Now we saw just now that here it says no redirect URL has been found. Right? So what we can do here with Firebase auth using this Firebase UI is that when the user successfully signs in, we redirect the user to a different page. And we can do it by passing in a sign in successful URL in the configuration. And then all one of these basically. So let's try specifying a sign in success URL in the config. So in our config here, if we reload this page, what did I do wrong here? Well, you can see, right? It appended google.com, so I should be instead specifying the HTTPS in the URL. Well, now it successfully redirects. We'll use this feature later. Okay, so let's move on to actually creating our to-do app. Right? So we've already git cloned our project here. Right. So you could go to lesson 2 materials and go to starter code. And then let's have a look. So yeah. So in lesson 2 materials, starter code, public, on main, you can see this is our to-do app that we want to create in the end. We can add items. We can check them off. And you can see on the back end, we maintain an array of to-do objects in this particular format. But now, not only do we want to do that, We also want to be able to sign out, log in, and show different to-do items for different users. So let's figure out how we can do that, shall we? So let's the HTML files have more or less been prepared for you already. What we'll be mainly editing today will be the JS files. So for simplicity's sake, I will be using this this npm module called live server that allows me to basically live hot reload a page within a particular directory. But for now, you could just open the page by pasting the URL on your desktop. It's just that, you know, this is prettier. So now it's starting up a live server. I'll just navigate to main.html where our app is. So here, let's do a quick recap of what we did the previous week. Right. In the previous week, we discussed how we can use Cloud Firestore to basically persist documents on Cloud Firestore, basically. So to create our app, we want our front end to be able to, you know, call these functions basically, and call these functions. Yeah. But you know, we want to create some utility functions to help us along with the process. So if you navigate to main.js, oh, I mean, of course, firstly you want to configure your Firebase config, right? So you can use your own. Please use your own values for the setup project here. Right, and then our first part is setting up the Firebase objects here so that we can use it later. So when I mean Firebase objects, I mean in this case, the Firestore object. So we just want const db equals Firebase. So you might be wondering, how come I have access to the Firebase object already? Because in the file, in the HTML page where this is main.js is loaded, main.html, we have already loaded the Firebase app. We've already loaded Firebase auth. We've already loaded Firebase data store, Firestore, and after that, we call init.js over here, which is where we set call Firebase initialize app, and then finally we move on to calling everything in main.js. So here we have firebase.firestore. Right. So let's start off by creating a collection in our web console, and let's call it, to create a database, and we start it in test mode. We'll secure it later. But basically, we want our documents to roughly have these fields: a user ID field, not an ID field, so the ID field will be the key for the document, but on our client side we want this ID field. A description, done, so whether the task is done or not, a created at and updated at time for, you know, just for basic tracking purposes. So let's start by creating collection got to-do items. Create an auto ID. User ID. Description. Done. Set it to a boolean. So false. Just set this as the value. So now we have our collection. So first, we want to create a method that can get us an array of to-do items. And basically we want this array to look like this. Right? So how do we go about doing that? Well, let's just quickly copy paste what a to-do object looks like for reference. Now, we'll pass to it a DB object, which is the one returned by Firebase.firestore. And for now, we could use a user ID as well, so that we can filter the documents. So I personally don't remember how Firebase Firestore works. So I live off basically reading the docs. So let's see. Read data once. So how do we get documents, right? And we try and understand how everything works. So first we want a reference to our collection. So db.collection. And if you're curious about what this returns, you could always look into the reference under the documentation under, let's see, Firebase Firestore overview. The Firestore object. So this is so you can see how you get this object. You get this by calling Firebase.firestore. And here you see we have collection. So what does collection return? Collection returns a collection reference. So this is a collection reference. To-do's ref will be a collection reference. Now, what then? What's next? We want to actually eventually get a vanilla JavaScript object of the reference. Right. So what next? Get all documents in the collection. Right. .get. So the question is, what does get return us, right? So let's dive even deeper. So the collection reference, calling the get method, returns a promise. So yeah. So promises are a very somewhat unique concept in JavaScript. But basically it allows us to perform asynchronous actions. Right. Okay, that's not very good. JS. So what you can do with a promise is like usually return when you do something like making an asynchronous request to a web server. And then what a promise can do is a promise can do two things. It can resolve successfully, or it can be rejected, which means something went wrong. So within this resolve and reject, you can attach callbacks to be fired when the promise resolves or rejects, basically. So you do this using the then function. But a quick shorthand for for working with promises is, instead of chaining tons of then methods for the return value of the promise, basically, you could just wrap everything in an async function. Maybe let's do a bit and create a new promise. Let's see. So over here, this example code. This is a promise that will be automatically resolved. It will basically be automatically resolved. So if you look at promise A, this is a promise object. So we can attach some behavior to be called with the return value that the promise resolves to. So yep, so you can see promise is resolved. Alternatively, you can have a promise that's rejected. And then if you call then here, now we have a problem, we have an uncaught problem, because you didn't handle the behavior when the promise gets rejected. So what we should do instead is not just have a then, but also handle what happens with a catch. So now I can see. But another way to not write these long chains of with callbacks in the arguments is just to use async. Wrap things in an async function, basically. So what we do here is, instead of todos.get.then, we can instead have and you can see this is perfectly valid since we've wrapped it in an async function. Now if we remove this, Well, if we remove this, it won't be valid. You can see the await keyword is only valid in a async function, basically. So yeah. So what we get back from await to-dos ref.get is not a promise, but instead we'll be getting back a query snapshot. So what can we do with a query snapshot? Well, the query snapshot has a for each method that will basically enumerate all the documents in the query snapshot. So what you can do here is result each. So this is a document reference. Query snapshot for each query document snapshot. So this doc over here is a query document snapshot. And we can check whether it exists. We can get its ID, or we can call the get method to get the data inside the document itself. So what we want to do is create an object like this. So we have all these fields, right? So every field except the ID field is already inside the document, so it's fine. And we want to push it to our output. So we create an empty array. And then we want to add it to the to-dos array. So again, what I'm going to do here is a little bit of JS trickery. I'm going to use the spread operator. Actually, you know what? Let's console log this first. So let's refresh our page. And over here now we have, oops, forgot to set. So now, if we call Firebase get to DB is our DB object, so we need to pass it to Firebase get to do. Pass it here, promise pending, and then we get our object with the information within this document. See here is the ID. This is the contents of the document. So what I'm going to do next is the basically JavaScript magic that I mentioned just now. So let's say we have an object so now if you want to create something like, if you want to get these values, this A and B value out, you could just have, let A equals to A dot A, and then let B equals to B dot B, A dot B. But, you could also do something like destructure, this thing called object destructuring, which is an alternate syntax that allows you to destructure things like objects and arrays. So instead of that, we could have let A1 maybe let's clear the context a bit. And we can have a and you can see now A is 1, B is 2. Similarly, we have this thing called the spread operator. That allows us to basically spread a object. Let's see. So let's use O as an example again, right? Let's O as an example again. So we could create A equals to O. So we apply the spread operator. And now I has the same content as O. But the thing is, I and O are not the same object. The pointer is not pointing towards the same thing. So if you use I, this will give you false as compared to that. This will give you true. But then we could also use this to add new attributes in our initialization of the object. So we could have I2 equals to O, then C, and now I2 has A and B and C. So this is what we're doing here. So to-dos, not push. Then also we want to set the ID field to the ID of the dog. Okay, let's have a look. If we look at our to-dos, no. So remember, since this is an async function, it will return a promise instead of the array itself. So we can handle it by, we can handle whatever result from this by chucking it in another async function. But this is basically done. But let's do it one step further, and let's have ourselves be able to filter the collection by the user ID. Yep. So instead of here, so we covered this last week, right? Where's the third argument? Yes, because we need to set this user ID. Now it returns me an empty string. But if I let's see what's this called. User ID. So if the user ID is user ID, we get back this. Same thing with create to do. So here to do object. Let's copy and paste it here. To do object looks like this. Or rather, we want to return a to-do object that looks like this. So how do we do this? Let's look at the docs, in, and have add data. So the same thing as up here, we want a collection. And then we'll just have, instead of set will set, instead of set, let's use add. Yep, add. So this is our output, right? Our input will look like this. Our input won't have the ID, since the ID is set by Firebase. So now, what to do? Just have to-dos ref dot add to-do. Since this will return a promise, I don't want it to return a promise, I want to return something I can use. I'll await it. And then what to-dos.ref.add, await to-dos ref.add to-do will return is a document reference like just now. So like this doc object over here. So I can get the ID. Once doc, as you can see here. I didn't pass it. Right. Pass it to DB object. Is it not turn? Let's see, collection, reference, add, we return a document reference. The document reference has, we need to get the document snapshot from the document reference. So again, we want to get the document snapshot. So same as here, we get it. Now we'll be able to get the doc ID and the doc data. Oh my god. But I can see here, it's added. So now I want to return something that looks like this. So similarly, just define less to do. Similar to above. So now we have this that we can use in our app. Now we're going to be able to update the to-do. So same thing. We want the document reference. So remember here, our input to-do object looks like this. So you want to get the ID, the document with the ID of to-do.id, which will look something like this. We want to wait. Actually no, it's not get, it's doc. Let's reference here. Update the document. Yep. So you want a document reference, and then we're going to update the document reference with the fields that we want to update. So do is so now we want to update with all the contents here except for the ID. So we can't just, we could do delete to-do.id, but that means the to-do, the ID will actually be deleted on this to-do object, and this might affect something upstream. So what we want to do is more or less create a copy of this to-do object by using our spread operator again. Let's try it now. So we have a to-do here. If we update it, we need ID. So let's get the ID. And then, look, it's changed. So now we can update. And we don't really need to delete, so it's fine. So now that we have our Firebase utility functions, let's move on to actually working with the front-end app, the DOM, basically. So let's have a brief look at how this page is implemented. Right? So typically you probably want to use a front-end framework for this, like Vue or React. But here we're doing it with vanilla HTML, CSS, and JavaScript because we're masochists. So first we want to start up a backing data model. I'll just call it to-dos, and you can see it from here. Or see it from here. The backing data model. Then we want to have some utility functions to add, basically add elements to the DOM. So like I have a utility function called .add to do, .update to do, and .delete to do. And again, .delete to do is not really used here. But let's explore how how we can use .add to do and .update to do. So .add to do and .update to do use one of these. Use these to do objects inside here. So if we have so we have a to do object here, and if you want to now we can add another item. We can also update another item. So if you want to change the description, you can set it to done, and now it gets dragged out. Or you can change the description. Oh, you can't change the description. Oops. But you can only change the done state. So you can set it to false, and now we can uncheck it. That's all we need for this app. We won't be touching these utility functions. What we will be touching is these callbacks. These callback functions within the that we pass to the event listeners. So to roughly go through what we're doing here. So when this entire page is loaded, we will call docs@todo for every item, every to-do item in the backing to-dos array. That'll be all. And then when we click this add item button, what we'll do is firstly we'll get this DOM element here, add item, the input field in the add item div. This will return us the DOM element. We'll get the value from it, and if it's null, then we ignore it and return and don't care because it's clearly a wrong input. Then we will create a new to-do object with the description from this value, and then push it to our backing to-dos array, and then call the function rather to add it to the DOM, and afterwards do some cleanup. And then another thing is we want to basically change the true-false state. We want to strike out this text when the value changes. Right, when we press this checkbox. So when we press this checkbox, the change event will fire from the checkbox, and it will bubble up to the parent element, which is the to-do item here, and then eventually the to-do items. So and it's called. The event will bubble up from here to this div and then eventually to this div, and we'll capture it here. We'll listen to it here. We'll look for what triggered the event, which is the event target, which is this checkbox, and then we'll look at the parent of the target, which is this outer div. Then we'll get the ID, the relevant ID from the div ID using some regular expression magic, and then find the appropriate to-do item in the to-dos backing array, and then update it accordingly. So now how do we tie this in with our Firebase utility functions, right? So what we want to do now is firstly not have these hard-coded values, and instead populate it with information from Firestore. So let's look at the onload event handler. Right. So before we do this, we actually want to call const. What do we call this? Let's call this T, and we want to get Firebase to dos plus it db plus it db. So right now we're filtering it. We don't really want to filter it. So let's remove this first. Let's remove the where first. Instead, we want to await, else it will return a promise, and then just so now we're getting items from Firebase. Next, we want to be able to add items to add the document to our backing Firestore. So look at this event handler here that fires when this add item button is called. So before we change the backing array and then update the DOM, let's instead we create the to-do item here, and then we'll call to-do. I'll wait here as well, since Firebase update to do is an async function. So you realize it'll take some time. Sorry, my bad. Requires its first. Collection reference dot requires its first. 116. What did I do wrong? Firebase updated. want to create to do, not update to do. Oop. Notice it takes a while because now we're writing to Firestore. You can see it here. So now we can add things to Firestore. Now let's have Firestore respond to whenever we change the done status on our front end. So instead of nothing changing here, when a to-do item is checked, the relevant document on Firestore will have its done value change as well. So now we found the to-do item. We'll just call. Does this return anything? Let's see. It doesn't. Yeah. Okay. To-do. And once again, we want to update. But before that, we have the to-do object. We want to change the done value to whether it's checked or not. So we get it from the checked attribute of this DOM object. We can see it here, basically. Document. What ID is this? Input. Oops. You see it's not checked. If you check it, get it again. Set to true. It's this item. So you check it, not set to true. So now we've updated the data model. Now we'll update So now, if we look at this hello to-do item, done set to false, check it, done is set to true, updated, that is updated. So now we more or less have a to-do application, but the problem is everybody can see everybody else's to-do items and it becomes very confusing. So what we want to do is to be what we want to do is to be able to only show a user their own to-do items. But let's take it step by step. First, we want only authenticated users to be able to see these to-do items, right? So we want a way to find out whether the user is authenticated or not. And also we want to implement Firebase authentication so that the user can log in, sign in with Firebase authentication. So now I want in this page, index.html to be our sign-in page. So like as we demonstrated from the start, we want to basically create the code. we want to run the code that injects the Firebase UI. So again, and I'll just put it in index.js. Then we can just simply copy paste it here. And now we have our sign-in page. Now remember, like just now, we want to redirect the user to the app page. Now we want to redirect the user to the app page when they're signed in. So again, we want to add this into the config. And the path to this is now. So now I can sign in. And then we also want to implement sign out functionality on this main page. So when a user clicks this sign out link, we will call the method on Firebase authentication to sign the user out. That basically involves adding an event listener on this. Let's find out if it does anything first. It doesn't, nothing. Document. What is this? The ID is called sign out. So listen to the click event. And then let's start by seeing if it'll fire the event. So now we're going to add this. The display clicked. Great. And then now we'll do we set up. We haven't set up the authentication object either. So we're going to set up and then call so now you can see here we can see our user ID and we can call sign out by pressing this button. But it still does nothing, right? You can still see the items here. Now what we want to do is redirect them to automatically redirect users to back to the login page when they are not authenticated on Firebase auth. So how do we do that? We can use this method on auth called on auth state change. Is it? Which takes a function. Takes a function that with a user argument, and then just, well, if the user is not signed in, then this user argument will be null. So we can check for it if user then we want to redirect it to the home screen, basically. We do this using the window location API. So what we can do here is basically redirect to any page. So you can try it here. If you set it to now we can redirect. So same thing here. Redirect it to index.html. So now I'm automatically redirected. However, if I sign in, I'm not automatically redirected. Now, next thing, we want our users to firstly, we want to disallow other users from seeing data from other users, right? So, well, we can enforce this client side, but on client side, the user still has access to the Firebase client side SDK, which will allow them to basically see everything if you don't set up security rules on the Firestore side. So let's set up some security rules. So right now, these rules are allowing everybody to read and write data to the Firestore, and we don't want that. So let's set it to false. Right. So how you write these rules is basically, if one of these rules, if one of these conditions evaluates to true, then the data can be safely read by the user. So let's try request. So what this rule here does is that it will only allow users to read any data of Firestore if they are authenticated. So we can test this out here. We can test it out on our page here. Right. Firebase.appstore.code. Let's get a specific. Yeah. Now we're authenticated. Nothing really happens. But if we sign out and we're not authenticated, then we'll get this error, Firebase error, missing or insufficient permissions. So that solves the first step. But now how do we prevent other users from seeing other users' data? we need another rule. This rule doesn't work anymore. So this rule here will allow any user to see all the data, any authenticated user to see any document in the Firestore. So I mean we can play around here. And if it's unauthenticated, I mean, of course here we want to limit it to do if you set it off to true. Now this read is allowed. Of course we want to not match all items, but only items in the to-do items collection. And now in addition to being authenticated, we want to check that the user is the correct user. So how do you check if the user is correct user? We want to see that basically the users of UID matches the user ID in the document field user ID. So how do we get it? A good thing, well, the good thing is I've already done this and I can reference my old code. But basically we want to check this. Expected string resource pool. But here you can see there's a resource object, and in our data we have everything here. In the request object we want to get this field, and in our resource object we want to get this field. So this field is resource data user ID. This field is request.auth.uid. So we want to make sure the two match. So now try to run this. This read will fail because this condition will evaluate the false. But if we provide the valid Firebase UID, then the read will be allowed. So now let's go back to our site. Here we see Firebase again complains. Now why does Firebase complains? Because in our get to dos here, we try to get everything in the collection, and the docs will say that you shouldn't try to use the security rules as a filter basically. That's fine. They recommend here. So you can't do this. Instead, before you actually make the query, you want to filter out the relevant documents that you want to access. So over here, we need to put this in again. And then, when we set up, we want to get the user ID, the UID. So count. But again, another problem. Cannot read property UID of now here. Now why is that so? Well, you can read it perfectly fine here. Let's find out. Let's Google. So what actually happens is that there is a lag to fetch auth details from Firebase, even when the entire page is loaded, right? So when do we know that we'll have our auth details? We know we'll have our auth details when the auth state changes. Then here we can have access to the UID, the user.id. So instead of having this block here, instead we do this. Copy it here. And then access the ID property on user. So now, yeah. Of course, we need to make this async again. Haha. Is the value? It's user.uid. And now we see nothing. And also, well, firstly, Firebase doesn't complain, but also, when we add new items, we want to add this item, this to-do item, with our user ID instead of without user ID. So right now in Firebase, add to-dos, Firebase create to-do. We want to insert the user ID into this to-do object, so that when we call Firebase create to-do, you know, it'll have something inside instead of a blank string. So let's just have so now I'm gonna add an item. Again, it takes a while. And again, here another problem of missing or insufficient permissions. Now why is this so? Let's test it on the rules playground. If you create. Even if it's authorized, the user is authorized. Well, we don't have resource data.uid because it's not been created yet. So what we want is instead of allow read and write, allow read and update, and allow create. And then we want to make sure that the user's UID matches the user ID in the request that they are sending. So we want to make sure resource request dot resource dot data dot ID false request. So now no problems. You can see an item here. So great. Now if we check this, again, it changes. And that's basically it. We're done. Done with that. We can sign out. Let's sign on with So now let's move on to Cloud Functions. So to basically, before we move on to Cloud Functions, let's set up the proper environment for Cloud Functions. So in order to use Cloud Functions, first you need to set up a billing account. So you could see how to set it up. I've already set up mine, so you could reference here in our notes to basically set up a billing account here. So over here in the upgrade button, besides Spark, sidebar and Firebase. Oh, I am still on a Spark plan. Still can't use Firebase functions. Am I on a Spark plan? Oh, we can use Cloud Functions now on a Spark plan. Great. I don't need to set anything up actually. Cool. Oh, we can ignore this. Then let's set up Firebase tools using this command line argument. So for the sake of everyone, let's do that. Let me first remove. Let me first remove it for myself. It's like the worst. Installing JS modules is the worst. Holy shit, this takes a long time. In the meantime, let's have a break, shall we? 5 minutes? No, I'll break until this is done. And we're done. That's fast, surprisingly. Then let's set up Firebase CLI by calling Firebase. Log in. I'm already logged in, but if you weren't logged in, it'll open a window for you to log in onto your Google account. So now let's navigate to the starter code directory and then call Firebase init. Ready to proceed? Yes. So today the functions we'll be using, the features we'll be using, Cloud Functions and hosting. That is all. And then we'll use our existing project that we created just now. Write in JavaScript. Don't use ESLint. Install dependencies. And again, we're installing dependencies. This is pretty fast though. So now, let's not overwrite our HTML files that we've already created. And initialization is complete. So now maybe before we move on to functions, let's deploy. And since we've already set up the entire folder structure, all you really need to do is just call Firebase deploy. And now this is important because you want this only flag here. Because if you don't do it without the only flag, then it'll try to deploy the cloud functions as well. Let's go have a look. No. No. And then, ta-da! Ta-dang! Alright, now it's deployed. Now, we want to do something with Cloud Functions. So, let's go to the functions. So you'll notice when we called Firebase init and we selected Cloud Functions, we created this directory called functions with index.js, package.json, package.log.json, and all that. So yeah. So now what we can do is write Cloud Functions up basically. So we'll write them for now in index.js. And coming from, JS in browser, you might wonder, what is this? What are all these new functions that we're seeing here, like require? So cloud functions are run in the Node.js environment. So Node.js is kind of, it is still JavaScript, but now we have some additional functionality. Things like using modules and packages. And if you're not familiar with it now, if there's the term package now, it's the P in npm. So npm stands for Node Package Manager, right? So what doing it in the Node.js environment allows you to do is allow you to install outside packages through npm instead of importing the entire script and then putting it in the global window context like we did in our plain HTML example. So like here, now we can import like packages, like add packages to our project and then import packages. So what this require function here basically doing is that it's looking for a Firebase functions package that's all like pre-installed, and it's installed actually here. You can see. Okay, never mind. It's very big. So let's look at this like hello world example, right? So what this hello world example is doing. Okay, firstly, over here what we're doing is this is also a Node.js module. So in a Node.js module, as opposed to importing via the script tag in raw HTML, is that by default nothing gets exposed to the outside. So if we just have const hello world, right? When you require this file, so let's say we have something else. Right. When we call